Hello, I'm Jim Patrick from the Yuma Main Library. February 24th, 2021 marks the centennial of Yuma's first public library, which was located at the site of the current Heritage Branch Library. As we celebrate 100 years of public library service in Yuma, we should also acknowledge the hard work and generosity that went into making that first public library a reality. On Thursday, February 24th, 1921, at 8:30 p.m., the Yuma Carnegie Library was opened to the public. According to the Yuma Morning Sun, community members came out in force to inspect the magnificent monument which stands in Sunset Park. Speeches were offered by Mayor Hightower and by Library Board member Mary Elizabeth Post. Records show that on the library's first day of operations, 17 library cards were issued and 13 books were checked out. As these articles indicate, a public library in Yuma had been a dream of years. Medora Ingalls has been credited with creating the first library in Yuma in 1883 at the Arizona Territorial Prison. Medora was the wife of Prison Superintendent Frank Ingalls and the mother of future Yuma Carnegie Library Director Addie Klein. Alice McInerney, whose husband succeeded Frank Ingalls, also worked to obtain reading materials for the prison library. But when Herbert Brown was superintendent in 1902, he banned newspapers from the prison library, fearing that reading articles about prison escapes would encourage Yuma's prisoners to attempt similar jailbreaks. As early as 1878, a few local businesses offered subscription-based lending libraries. There were also several early reading rooms in Yuma, but most of these served special audiences, for example, the Christian Science Reading Room and the Socialist Party Reading Room. In 1894, the Yuma Free Reading Room opened to the general public with an impressive collection of newspaper subscriptions from major American cities. Note that the headline refers to the reading room as the New Library. A year later, in July 1895, an ice cream social was held at the home of Mary Elizabeth Post to raise money to help pay for the reading room's periodical subscriptions. Like other early reading rooms, this one does not appear to have had a long life, but Mary Elizabeth Post remained a vocal proponent of bringing a public library to Yuma. Ms. Post was not only a renowned Yuma teacher from 1873 to 1915, but she was later a founding member of the Yuma Carnegie Library Board, a position she held until her death in 1934 at the age of 93. This article indicates that by 1903, Yuma no longer had a free reading room for the general public. Over the next few years, the Total Abstinence League, the Commercial Club, and the Ocotillo Women's Club would all make efforts at operating a public reading room. The article also shows that a desire for a Carnegie Library was being expressed in Yuma as early as 1903. In November 1914, a letter to the newspaper by a citizen named Bud stated that Yuma was once again in need of a public reading room. Bud pointed out that young and old needed a place to sit and read current magazines and newspapers. In early 1915, the Yuma City Club, a local women's group, began operating a reading room in the Polhamus building on Madison Avenue. Today, a couple of local businesses share the restored Polhamus house. On January 22, 1916, Yuma experienced a devastating flood that displaced nearly 1,000 persons. The Polhamus building was quickly converted from a reading room to the headquarters of the Flood Relief Committee. Once the Relief Committee was disbanded, the Polhamus house once again served as Yuma's reading room. Pearl Manifold was a Yuma County resident for most of her 95 years, and she was active in early women's club efforts to first maintain a community reading room and then to establish a public library for Yuma. The photograph shows Pearl Manifold 50 years later being recognized for her support of Arizona Western College. In her later years, Auntie Pearl offered some colorful recollections about fundraising for the Madison Avenue Reading Room. She recalled carrying a pail on Main Street to collect donations from downtown merchants. According to Pearl Manifold, when hot weather arrived and I knew I would be collecting the next day, I would frequently put my corset in the refrigerator so I would at least start out cool. She described another challenge faced by the fundraising women. We were cautioned against going along the northern end of Main Street because of the many saloons and hangers-on. Our friends were afraid our presence might be misunderstood. Attendees at the Women's Club dance contributed to the library fund while enjoying the music of the 14th Infantry Band. While the Madison Avenue Reading Room continued to serve the community, fundraising and organizing efforts were being made to obtain a Carnegie Library for Yuma. To some, Andrew Carnegie was a robber baron who achieved his great wealth by exploiting the workers in his steel mills. To others, his unprecedented philanthropy make him the patron saint of libraries. What is indisputable is that between 1886 and his death in 1919, Andrew Carnegie provided funding for the construction of nearly 1,700 libraries in the United States, as well as many more around the world. Yuma citizens seeking a public library were well aware of Andrew Carnegie's support of libraries, since Tucson, Prescott, and Phoenix all had Carnegie Libraries by 1908, and in Imperial County, California, the towns of El Centro, Calexico, and Imperial each had Carnegie Libraries by 1915. Contacting Andrew Carnegie had been suggested by Yuma's public library advocates for several years prior to Councilman Verdugo's pledge to make a formal request in June 1913. One of Andrew Carnegie's stipulations was that the Carnegie Corporation would communicate only with local government officials, not with private citizens or organizations. Another stipulation of the library grant program was that local communities were required to provide a suitable site for their libraries. Sunset Park, which later became known simply as Library Park, had been established on a block of land purchased by the city in 1908. The area was set aside as a site for a public park and for public buildings. Then, as now, applying for library grants was not a speedy process, and while local newspaper articles suggested that Andrew Carnegie was personally responding to the requests from Yuma, there was, in fact, a team of officers of the Carnegie Corporation who administered library grants and other requests for funding in accordance with Andrew Carnegie's guidelines. A critical step was taken when the budget adopted by the city of Yuma in July 1916 contained for the first time a library assessment of $600 for library and reading rooms. The last of Andrew Carnegie's stipulations was that each local community had to agree to provide ongoing tax support to maintain its Carnegie Library. When the City Council voted to accept an offer of $10,000 from the Carnegie Corporation in October 1917, they also agreed to raise the annual library assessment to $1,000. The plans for Yuma's library were received from New York architect Henry Whitfield in October 1919, 2 months after Andrew Carnegie's death at the age of 83. The goal of completing construction that winter was not met, one reason being that some building materials were still in short supply following the end of World War I. The new library was built at a cost of $13,563, well over the $10,000 received from the Carnegie Corporation. The excess costs had to be covered by funds from the city budget. The original Carnegie Library Board consisted of only 3 members, one of whom was Mary Elizabeth Post. The writer of the article stated that the board, quote, will have complete jurisdiction and will run the library to suit themselves, unquote. In fact, Addie Klein, the daughter of Frank and Medora Ingalls, had been hired to be Yuma's first head librarian, and for the next 37 years it was Addie Klein who ran the library. The headline is misleading, since the Carnegie Library didn't have its formal opening until 4 months after this article was published. But beginning on October 21, 1920, the library was open 1 hour a day for humans to donate books. The $10,000 received from the Carnegie Corporation was earmarked for a library building, not for library books, so the Yuma Library opening day collection of 1,053 books consisted almost entirely of donations. A visit to Calexico's Carnegie Technology Branch will give today's library user a feel for what Yuma's first public library was like. The Calexico Carnegie Library, which opened in 1915, has been faithfully restored to maintain its original design. Like Yuma, Calexico received a $10,000 Carnegie grant and it appears that the two communities adopted similar building designs for their Carnegie libraries. Major renovations in 1950 and 1966 offered expanded space and new designs to Yuma's original Carnegie Library. When Yuma's current main library was being constructed and made ready for its May 2009 opening, the old main library was renovated and transformed into the Heritage Library, one of several full-service branch libraries now serving Yuma County. 100 years of changes have occurred since Yuma's first public library opened on February 24, 1921. What has not changed, a century later, is the library's steadfast mission to serve the community, a community which has faithfully supported its public libraries for 100 years and counting.